Telegram has become sort of the default public square in a lot of countries that don't have an sort of open and free public public dialogue or unrestrained, unrestricted media. While it is certainly has been used for the purposes of drug trafficking and, say, the distribution of child pornography, which are horrible, they released this 2023 Global Expression Report that reveals that 80% of the world's population has less freedom of expression today than they did in the year 2000. That 80% have less freedom of expression than they did a quarter century ago.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. More than half the world is now on social media, and for a while it looked like its growth was unstoppable. But it seems the tide is turning. Some governments now view social platforms as a threat and are taking action. Just recently, Brazil banned X, which is formerly Twitter. And last month, the CEO of the Telegram app was arrested in France. Now, Telegram is also in the crosshairs of Denmark's justice minister, who is calling for a ban on encrypted messaging apps, including Signal and WhatsApp. So, to get a steer on the complex relationship between social media, governments, and corporate control, we are joined by Steve Macek, professor of communication at North Central College in the Chicago area. And he's also the co-author of the book Censorship, Digital Media, and the Global Crackdown on Freedom of Expression. Thank you very much for joining us today, Steve. We're very excited to have you on the program to talk about this incredibly important topic and the latest developments, including the detention of the messaging app Telegram founder Pavel Durov in France. It stirred up a lot of heated debate on freedom of speech and censorship. Could we read this as a trend towards trying to manage the conversations on these social medias?
I certainly think so. And first of all, let me say thank you, Divya, for inviting me on to the show. It's a real pleasure. This is an alarming development. As I'm sure quite a few of your viewers know, Telegram has become sort of the default public square in a lot of countries that don't have an sort of open and free public public dialogue or unrestrained, unrestricted media. So Telegram's got something like a billion, close to a billion users worldwide. And the reason Pavel Durov was arrested, the ostensive reason, is that the platform that he created, Telegram, which is encrypted, is being used for drug trafficking, for the distribution of child pornography, and maybe being used by terrorists, right, to communicate with each other. But along with these illicit activities, Telegram's users are also using the platform to discuss and debate important political issues in countries where that kind of dialogue and debate is not allowed, to share critical information that very repressive governments often don't want circulated, to connect with other, pro-dissidents and pro-democracy activists, and to form communities. It's being used, we know, by political dissidents in Russia and Belarus, Myanmar. You can name a number of countries where it is widely used, embraced by dissidents, to criticize authoritarian regimes in their country, to share accurate information about things like wars and elections, and so on. And so, while it is certainly has been used for the purposes of drug trafficking and, say, the distribution of child pornography, which are horrible, it's also been used, right, as a tool of democracy, and as a way of giving voice to civil society and social movements for activism and mobilization. And I think if you look at the places where, Telegram has been blocked, it has been banned in Iran since 2018, banned in Russia for 2 years, from 2018 to 2020. It has been banned in the People's Republic of China since 2015, and in Thailand since 2020. That tells you a lot about, right, the politics of Telegram, because these are all repressive authoritarian regimes, and there is a reason why they want to shut this platform down. This particular arrest, my understanding is because there has been this new cybercrime law that's been passed that is now being applied for, I think, the first time against Pavel Durov, and this has elicited enormous criticism, really from across the political spectrum, but especially by people who see themselves as civil libertarians, whether they are left-wing or right-wing civil libertarians. People who see themselves as civil libertarians have been incredibly critical of this, and it remains to be seen what's going to happen. He has been arrested, but it remains to be seen whether or not he will actually be convicted.
So I do remember Telegram being widely used during the Hong Kong protests, which I was covering in 2019, and going forward for exactly the reasons you say. But the question is there such a thing as lawful monitoring?
Is there such a thing as lawful government monitoring of people's use of social media? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah,
especially when these platforms can be used for various activities that are criminal, or like the ones you listed that France had listed against Telegram. Telegram's founder.
My position on that, I think I have a clear position on it. It's not something we actually wrote about in the book, but my position is, of course, there are occasions when people are engaged in criminal activity or in, say, terrorist activity, which might threaten large numbers of people, where it is legitimate for government to engage in surveillance, right, and to intercept people's communications. That's always been the case, going back to when we had no, internet, when the electronic communication people were engaged in was by phone or by radio. It's always been legitimate in those cases for government to survey people. But in those cases, say, putting a wiretap on somebody's phone, usually in most countries that have rule of law, the law enforcement authorities have to bring to a court probable cause that this particular channel of communication is being used to facilitate a crime or illegal activity. And my concern with a lot of the laws that have been passed around encrypted, end-to-end encrypted messaging services like Telegram and Signal is that governments are saying, well, you have to allow us to survey and eavesdrop on everything people are saying, whether or not we suspect them of committing crimes or planning to commit crimes. And that's a very different thing. There should be some provision that allows governments to ask, and I know we'll probably talk about Brazil's decision to ban X later on in the program. There should be some provision for governments who believe that some sort of platform has been used to facilitate a serious crime to be able to request specific kinds of information. My concern, though, is that what the governments want is to be able to, at will, survey what people are saying on WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram, and that's very problematic.
Okay, since you brought up, let's go to Brazil's decision to ban X, formerly Twitter. How do you think these actions are shaping conversations and freedom of speech in democratic countries? And do you think this is going to start becoming a trend?
I do think I think it's already a trend, and it's sort of an alarming trend. I think the case of Brazil's decision to ban X, and I have looked into this a little bit, is a little bit different than some of the other instances where, for example, the People's Republic of China or Thailand banning Telegram outright. This was an attempt, very clearly, if it wasn't to overthrow the elected government, to disrupt it, and so they requested, right, kind of, information that could help them apprehend people who had committed crimes. this was the Supreme Court of Brazil. Elon Musk had taken over subsequently as the owner of X, or what was at the time Twitter and then became X. And he just defied the Supreme Court's orders. Like this, if the highest court in the land is ordering you to hand over information to facilitate an investigation in the service of investigation, you really have no choice but to comply. But he refused. Then his Brazilian legal team resigned, and he didn't replace them. This led to a bunch more delays in X complying with these, basically discovery plans, requests for information that had been made by the Supreme Court. And then it was at that point, as I understand it, that the Supreme Court Justice Alexandra de Moraes ordered that X be banned, and then put these very heavy fines on anybody attempting to circumvent the ban in Brazil and access an X account and start making posts. I think, I'm not a big fan of Elon Musk, and I think that what he has done in this case is very suspicious. I don't know. I can't say. I'm not an expert on this case. I can't say whether what the Supreme Court was asking for, the kind of information they were asking for about these accounts, was illegitimate or not. But I do think that the result of this is to create a free speech crisis, because citizens in Brazil who have come to rely on X, right, as a source of news and information, are now been overnight cut off. And it's one of those classic examples of like overreaction, right? This is the parallel I would draw is to the law that was passed here in the United States that basically orders Twitter to, that requires that Twitter have no longer have a Chinese, no longer be owned by ByteDance, which is of course
TikTok, right? Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah, if we're going to move on to that. Basically, the U.S. government fears that TikTok is a national security threat because China can access the data of TikTok's users.
Their allegation. Yeah.
So then is that an impingement on freedom of speech, or is this really about national security?
I think it is an impingement on freedom of speech, and here's why. Because there are other measures that that Congress, the U.S. government could take, short of shutting down the platform in the United States, that would achieve the ostensive ends of protecting national security. What the United States needs, in my view, is a law that protects the data privacy of all social media users, whether they're using TikTok, right, or a company like Meta, which owns both Facebook and Instagram, or a platform like YouTube, which is owned by Alphabet, with the parent company of Google. I think that American citizens need to have their data privacy protected from all of those social media platforms. And singling out TikTok, nobody has ever demonstrated to my satisfaction, or to anyone who follows this satisfaction, that the kind of data that is being used by TikTok threatens national security, is being collected by TikTok from American citizens in any way threatens national security. It is purely speculative that it does. And so the solution to that is not to shut down a platform that tens of millions of Americans use, and especially young Americans use to communicate with each other, and for entertainment, of course, as well, but they use it to communicate with each other, to carry on debates, to comment on public affairs. And the solution is not to shut that down. It is to make all social media platforms respect the privacy, the data privacy of their users. Every user of every social media platform should have the right to know what information is being gathered about them and the right to have that information deleted if they so choose. Citizens of the EU have something like that because of European Union laws. Unfortunately, in the United States, we don't. So I think the people who passed the TikTok ban law, the law that requires that TikTok be spun off from ByteDance and no longer be owned by a Chinese parent company, are basically playing politics. They're trying to score political points by demonizing the People's Republic of China, and I think it's sort of reprehensible, because I do think the issue of data privacy online is a serious one, and Congress could do something to address it. But it is not a national security issue. I'll say that.
And definitely that is the conversation that should be happening within Congress and within government. But if we go back to corporations themselves taking responsibility, we've just heard that Meta, which has Facebook, has decided to ban RT and other platforms that are Russian state-owned. Is there an argument for saying that we still need to, I mean, these are very, very popular platforms. Is there an argument for saying that we still need to hear the other side, although they do say that it is spreading misinformation and disinformation?
So this raises the whole question, and I thank you for that question, because I think it's an important question. It raises the whole question of what do we do about misinformation and propaganda that circulates online. I don't think there's any question that RT, which is a state-owned Russian media company, is spreading pro-Russian propaganda and also sometimes spreading misinformation. But I can tell you, as somebody who used to occasionally watch RT programs, when it was on our television system, cable systems here in the United States, that they occasionally have guests on who add a perspective that you will not see anywhere else on American television. And so I think what needs to happen is not outright banning of RT or any other media outlet from social media, but instead clear labeling. This is something that actually Twitter, now X, did in the wake of the 2020 election, when Donald Trump was engaging in election denial. What they did was label his posts and label the posts of other people who were spreading misinformation and lies, open lies about the outcome of the 2020 election. They labeled it clearly as misinformation, and then provided alternative sources of information in links that you could click on to learn more. That is a case of more speech, not censorship. So what I would advocate for is the best solution to misinformation and fake news is not trying to suppress what we're calling misinformation or fake news, but instead more information, better information, to counter the misinformation and fake news. And the advantage of doing it that way, providing labeling and additional sources of reliable, credible, accurate information, also the advantage of that is that the people who are purveying the fake information and the propaganda cannot claim to be victims and thereby elicit sympathy from people because they're being censored, right? Because you're not censoring them. You're just refuting what they're saying, which is a very different thing.
Digital literacy is one of the topics you've spoken about. So how does this relate to that, to this idea of giving the information of where the source is?
Right. So I think, in the book that we wrote, we're big advocates of the need for critical media literacy as sort of a response to fake news, right, and misinformation. And there's, what I need to say is, and I'm sure your viewers are aware that a number of countries around the world have adopted laws that criminalize the dissemination of fake news, right, and misinformation. Laws like this have been passed in Bangladesh and Cameroon, and Kenya, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, I believe, has a law like this. South Korea, I believe, has a law like this. United Arab Emirates, and there are a number of others. I know Greece was considering adopting such a law. The problem with laws that criminalize fake news is that it leaves the decision about what is and is not fake or credible news in the hands of government officials, which could lead, paradoxically, to censorship, which would open the door to more fake news. I think, as I said, what we need is, if we're going to have a policy about this, is more transparency and more speech, like labeling of fake content. And then we need critical media literacy education in schools, starting at a young age, but going through high schools and into college, so that people who are consuming media are asking kind of critical questions about who is creating the media that they're consuming, and why they're creating that media, how is this media being funded, where was the information that is being reported in this story gathered? What sources were used? How's the story being framed? Does it come from a particular political or ideological or religious point of view or national point of view? And they need to ask questions about what is being left out of whatever story that they're reading, right? What perspectives are being centered and which ones are being marginalized? And so I think if people are educated throughout their formative years to become critical media consumers who don't just passively accept at face value what's reported on the news or what they read on websites, but instead are asking critical questions, that's going to go a long way to addressing the problem of fake news, because there won't be an audience then for fake news.
So I just wanted to dial back a little bit to one of the points we made at the beginning when we were talking about governments limiting the use of communication apps or certain social media platforms. And you spoke about a lot of repressive government regimes who use this as a tactic, as a form of controlling the conversation or censorship. But let me ask you about quite an issue that is developing at the moment. Denmark, which is ranked third in the Human Freedom Index in 2023, is also seemingly making a move towards limiting these communication apps. In fact, the country's justice minister is urging a ban on encrypted apps, which include WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram. Now, if that goes ahead, what kind of a message does it send to other countries which have open and free democracies?
I think it sends a really chilling message, because this is not the only law that. So Denmark is considering, as you said, a law to ban end-to-end encrypted messaging services like WhatsApp and Telegram, but they've also passed laws, for example, banning the burning of Qurans, right? So they've passed other laws that are restricting freedom of expression. And this is something that people who monitor and track the state of free expression around the world have been noticing in recent years. It is, yes, the situation is worse in illiberal countries with authoritarian or dictatorial regimes, but even in countries that are nominally liberal democracies, we're seeing a retreat of free speech. Some people are talking about a free speech recession. And I'll just point out that Article 19, which is an international civil liberties advocacy organization that monitors free speech around the world, it's a European-based organization. They released this 2023 Global Expression Report that reveals that 80% of the world's population has less freedom of expression today than they did in the year 2000. That 80% have less freedom of expression than they did a quarter century ago. That means that there are people who have seen a retreat in their freedom, or a decline in their freedom of expression, who live in liberal democracies, right? Now, 53%, according to the report, 53% of the world's population live in countries where freedom of expression is classified as in crisis. It's not just facing very high government, very high government restrictions. It is actually in crisis, in danger of disappearing. And it's actions like the one that Denmark is contemplating that contribute to this. And in my view, there's a phrase that I like to use to refer to these kinds of draconian attempts to shut down channels of popular communication. It's called burning down the house to roast a pig, right? Where you're taking these extreme, overly broad measures to address a very specific problem, right? The specific problem they're trying to address by banning these end-to-end encrypted messaging services is they want to prevent drug trafficking, or they want to prevent human trafficking, or they want to prevent the spread of child pornography. You can come up with more narrowly tailored policies to address those issues without endangering the free speech of everyone in your society. I think we have done it for years, and so this is a terrifying, I think, overreaction to some of the technical capabilities of these new messaging services, right? The fact that they are end-to-end encrypted in a way that defies secret intelligence agencies' abilities to crack to break in and listen to what people are talking about.
Steve, I'm dating myself when I say I remember a time before social media, but I also remember a time when it started coming in and we believed that it meant more freedom and more access to information. But what it seems to have done is make us amplify our own beliefs more by who we follow. And then on top of that,
Absolutely.
with the statistics you give, it seems to be turning the other way too, which is very troubling. Thank you, Steve Macek, Professor of Communication at the North Central College, for joining us from the Chicago area in the United States. And for our viewers everywhere, it has been good to have your company. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you'd like to add to the dialogue, do join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.